Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone. Budget day is upon us, and I think the big takeaways for us looking at the budget that we've just seen is that this is a backwards budget. It is taking Kiwi households backwards. It is certainly taking our economic books and our fiscals backwards, and is certainly taking outcomes backwards. We thought about calling it the Band-Aid budget. We thought about calling it the big blowout budget, but we settled obviously on the backwards budget. The real reality is there is no economic management and leadership to be able to deal with this big issue that we've got, which is the cost of living crisis, and that's something that we're really concerned about, obviously. With that, happy to take questions.
Why Kiwi families going backwards? They'll get a boost of $350.
Yeah, well, we've got a major cost of living crisis in this country. We have inflation at a 30-year high. We have inflation at almost 7%, wages at 3%, and everybody is worse off than they were 12 months ago. And the government's response is a band-aided solution of a cost of living payment that fundamentally is available for 3 months. And yet the Treasury forecast we just saw today actually has inflation being not back to within the 3% band until 2025. And so it's a stopgap measure. It's a band-aid solution to a serious problem, which is actually what are the economic fundamentals that we need to be fronting up for to deal with the cost of living crisis. I'd also just put it to you, there is nothing, that cost of living payment doesn't get to an average income earner. If you earn $71,000 or more in this country and you may be a person in a good job with an average income, a nurse, a doctor, a police officer, you don't benefit from that payment. And so essentially, our argument has been very simple. Take the current progressive tax system, lift the tax thresholds by the amount of inflation, and that would mean that an average household would actually get $1,600 back a year.
But 80% of Kiwis do get it, though.
The reality is, if you're on the average income, you don't get it. And the better solution, frankly, is to just do a very common sense, very practical, very pragmatic response, which would be a longer term response than just 3 months and a sugar hit, would actually be to index tax thresholds as we're talking about.
Do you support the payment?
So the government is looking at giving solo parents on a benefit their child support payments instead of confiscating them, which was something that was brought in the 90s. What do you make of that?
I haven't had a chance to get into that level of detail. We've had an hour in a lockup and then into Parliament to give our speech, so you'll appreciate that we want a bit more time to digest what's actually in it. We will go through it and we will review things, and where we think things are good and make sense, we'll say so. But actually, the bigger issue is we have just seen a huge budget blowout. I just want everyone to understand this. We are spending $127 billion in government spending. Grant Robertson has just said that he would spend $6 billion, the biggest budget spend up we've ever seen in the history of this country. And it's not just that. He's taken $2.5 billion on top of the $6 billion from the next 2 years of budgets and pulled that into this budget as well. And then the cost of living payment, the short-term band-aid solution for 3 months on top of some climate stuff, another billion on top of that. So you're really talking about a $9.5 billion huge amount of cash that's actually come out and been announced today. And as a result, the surplus has been pushed out to 2025. And when you've got a finance minister like this one who's deeply addicted to spending, I can tell you now, I don't trust him to deliver that. And then we have now tripled our debt to over $170 billion. And so that's the reality of what's happening here in New Zealand at the moment. And we have a cost of living crisis, and you have to control spending.
What difference will today's initiatives make to the housing crisis?
Well, the challenge very clearly is we've seen a government that hasn't delivered for housing. It hasn't been able to deliver housing. House prices are up $400,000. Rents are up $150 a week, in part because they ended up extending the Bright Line and removing interest deductibility. We've got a fourfold wait for state housing lists. We've got 4,500 kids waking up in motels today.
The cap for first-time buyers seeking assistance has been raised significantly. Isn't that a good thing?
Well, again, as I said, we haven't gone through the detail of being able to see all of that, and we will revisit that over the next couple of days and see what we think.
And every mortgage holder should look at this budget and see inflation set to stay outside the Reserve Bank's target until 2025. I'll tell you what that means.
Yeah.
That means higher interest rates for longer. That means less purchasing power for everyone with a mortgage in this country. They will be spending thousands more servicing their debt, and that's going to make it a lot harder for many people to enter the housing market.
Mr. Luxon, just to be clear, do you support the cost of living payment?
The much better solution is a longer term, much more pragmatic, practical, sensible, strategic solution, which is to say we are dealing with an economy with inflation, and we haven't dealt with that for the last 30 years, and that requires quite a different approach and mindset to say how we're going to deal with it. The better answer is to do what we've been advocating for, is inflation adjust tax thresholds that lifts all those tax thresholds up by 12%, and then you're able to get $1,600 back to an average family.
So you vote against the cost of living payment?
We will be working our way through the detail of this package over the next 24 hours and working out where we go.
Chris, you said in the House that it was a small group of New Zealanders who will benefit from that cost of living package. The reality is, though, is that the winter energy payment and the cost of living amount is 81% of 18-year-olds and over in the population. 50% of them are going to receive that benefit package.
Yeah, but the winter energy
how
payment,
small group of people?
the winter energy payment is something that's already existing, right? It's not new. It's not part of it. It's not new. Right? It's already existing.
And it's still 50%. So you've got 81% who are going to be covered. 51% of that is covered by this new one. So are you, if you put that with the other 30, are you kind of honing in on the 19% at the moment?
What we're saying really clearly is, look, if you earn $50,000 or more, you would be better off dealing with our response, which is a taxation adjusted threshold tax plan, because you actually end up dealing with inflation better. Keep people with their own money. They don't have to give it to the government, recycle it, and then get it back to them through some sort of payment. They actually can hang on to it for themselves. That's a much better response than a 3-month $350 payment that then we're still dealing with inflation at the end of 3 months. It's going to be out there for 2025.
Isn't the reality that when money is tight, you're actually better to focus on the group of people who need it most? Isn't that how these?
Well, that's exactly why our tax inflation adjusted tax threshold policy works incredibly well. It's the same system, we just lift it up by the amount of inflation to help the squeeze middle.
And most would argue they don't need it.
It's a common sense tax indexation, happens around the world. It's sensible, it's pragmatic, it's the cleanest, easiest way to get people cash so they can actually navigate the cost of living.
Joe, let's be clear, that temporary cost of living payment lasts for 3 months. The cost of living will keep rising for another 2 years after that. So your typical New Zealand household will keep going backwards as the cost of living crisis bites. You know, $350, that's enough for a plane ticket to Australia. And I'd suggest to you, some New Zealanders, when they look at these forecasts, will be buying that ticket.
On inflation, how good an argument is that given we're seeing that in every country?
Well, look, here's the deal. The Treasury actually said domestic inflation is actually really contributing to New Zealand's situation. The Prime Minister likes to say it's a global phenomenon, but the reality is we are doing much worse on inflation than many of our trading partners. She went to Singapore, that's at 4%. Japan's at 1%. Australia's at 5%. We're at 7%, and we know we've got higher inflationary expectations coming our way. So the reality is, yes, there are global components to it, but there is also strong domestic components to it. And what we've been saying since Nicola and I became the leaders is, hey, listen, there are some signs in this economy that it's being overcooked and overheated. It's constrained because borders have been closed, immigration settings have been locked down, that we actually end up cooking it up and we're actually driving domestic inflation. And so our plan is very simple. Do not add costs to businesses that lead to go through to higher prices. So therefore, pull back the bright line test, put back interest deductibility. Don't go off and do a national award scheme and national insurance. That's just going to calcify the New Zealand labour market and the economy. It's not going to lead to enhanced productivity. Secondarily, we have businesses here that are hugely constrained in their ability to grow, which is what we want. We want more growth. You're seeing in this budget that actually national economic growth is going to drop to 1% over the course of this period by 2025. So we've got falling levels of growth, and we need to actually get our business community and our productive community actually doing that. That means go back and look at those immigration settings. We've been too slow, not fast enough to unlock that so we get critical and essential workers here. And then the third thing I've been saying for weeks now, I've been saying since we began, is you've got to remember there is $127 billion in existing spending that we've got going on here. And so you have to interrogate that. You have to be able to come back through that and say, well, why have we had such a big blowout in spending, and are we actually getting outcomes and value for that? And that's what Nicola's been saying over the last, we go through line by line and actually we look at the programs that are not working and don't do it. So for example, $650 million for corporate welfare or cash to corporates through the climate reduction plan that we saw earlier in the week is a good example where that money shouldn't be going to businesses that know what they've got to do and should be able to do what they need to do.
What you're saying today, I appreciate you've only had the budget for so long, but what's one thing that you cut?
Well, what I'd say to you is I'm not going to go into that because I really, in fairness, we were put into a lock-up at 1 o'clock. We went straight into the House at 2 o'clock and we've walked straight from the House to see you right now. And there's a lot of detail for us to go through. But what I'm trying to say is we need to have a more elevated, bigger, more strategic conversation that we are dealing with inflation, which we have not dealt with in this country for over 30 years. And we need to be able to manage this economy incredibly well. Because I tell you right now, go back and look at economic history. When inflation takes off and it hits double digit, when When interest rates hit 19%, as they did here in New Zealand in the early 80s, it destroys economies and it destroys people. So we have to be really careful about how we manage going forward from here.
What
Does
about
National
health?
support
Is
the
that a good
redevelopment
scheme
of the
for health
parliament?
budget?
Sorry, Jo?
What about health? Is that a good scheme in terms
Well,
of that budget?
Yeah, I mean, health is something that's always challenged, right? We always want better health outcomes. That's the reality of it. But again, a lot of, in a cursory read through in the lockup, what I could see was a lot of money going into what we call cost pressures. That is about inflation, and that is about restructuring, and that is not leading to better health outcomes. And that's what I think we have completely lost. We've lost financial discipline, we've lost clarity around targets and outcomes, and that's what we want to be able to put back
Are you
in.
pleased that's quite a small amount that's actually been allocated to the Māori Health Authority?
Well, our position on that is, again, it's another competing bureaucracy, by its own admission, won't deliver a single improved outcome for Māori for 5 years, and that's not good enough. We want to get improved outcomes. The government stopped tracking health outcomes. They stopped reporting on it, and all of them have got worse. And so we've got to be really focused on health outcomes and how we deliver that.
Does National support the redevelopment of the parliamentary precinct?
Again, I'm not going. Yeah, well, yes, so we have done. That was something that we talked about in the last, over the last year with the Speaker, and we're supportive of making those investments to make sure that we have a really good place to functioning democracy in New Zealand.
We don't want a wall, though.
Yeah.
What's one thing you like out of today's budget?
Again, I haven't gone through it, but what I don't like, I can tell you what I don't like, is we have a massive blowout in spending. And I don't think people are internalising the reality of what is happening here. That is not good for New Zealand. New Zealand, the Prime Minister and Grant Robertson like to compare our numbers to other countries. We are a small country. Australia is a medium-sized country. America is a large country. As a result, when we are a small country, we get knocked around and smashed around, as we've seen through our history, a lot more with global economic forces and challenges ahead of us. So it makes sense to actually manage fiscally your situation incredibly well, so that you actually do that job, so that New Zealand is protected as best we can do as we go through tough times ahead.
I thought we were here to propose...
Sorry.
$11 billion over the next 4 years. Are you saying that isn't needed?
No, we're saying we need to spend money on healthcare, and under a national government we will increase spending in health and education each and every year under our government. But what I'm saying to you is it's all about delivering health outcomes. Here's an example. This government came to power and there was just over 1,000 people that were actually on the wait list to see their first specialist in a 4-month period. In February 2020, that had gone up to 14,500 people. That's before COVID. Since COVID, it's got even worse, that wait list. So that's the metric that you focus on, and you make sure the money goes into that, delivering that outcome. And the point I was making in my speech is the government conflates and it confuses spending money with actually getting outcomes. And it's really important to understand that there is implementation, execution, delivery. There's a skill set that you need to turn money into hard outcomes. And that's what this government hasn't been able to do. You can choose education, you can look at transport, you can look at health, you can look at any topic, immigration. We haven't been able, we've spent more, there's more spending going in, there's more bureaucrats having gone in, and there's worse outcomes. That is a unique skill set of this government. That is not common. Usually when you spend more money, hire more people, you should get better outcomes, and that hasn't happened in this government.
You said you were going to propose as well as oppose, but you couldn't name one thing in this budget you liked in response to Alex's
No, I'm not going to go through. I wanted us, in fairness to us, to be able to have an opportunity. You had 3 hours in a lockup to be able to identify all the program. We had less than an hour, and then we're straight into Parliament, and we've come out here in fairness to talk to you fine people. We owe it. We'll have a chance for us to be able to go through and be able to think about what we do like and things that we don't. But the bigger issue is you need to understand, beyond the band-aid solutions and the things that are thrown out, you've got to say what are the fundamentals by which we're running this economy. And there is no economic leadership and there is poor economic management. Okay, last question. Yeah, I mean, look, that carries on for another 2 months, isn't it? Another band-aid solution for 2 months on rucks and public transport. Another band-aid solution with a cost of living crisis payment. But what we really need is proper, long-term, smart, strategic economic management of this country, because we are sailing into difficult times with inflation sitting there for longer, as the Treasury showed us, growth slowing, interest rates increasing at a more rapid rate as a consequence of those outcomes.
Not on the like list.
Sorry?
It's on the dislike list.
I'm telling you that what we're saying is we need strong economic management and leadership to manage the economy as we look out over the next 5 years. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Sorry? Oh, look, I mean, we said we'd support it for the first 3 months, see how it went. It certainly is helpful. But again, I'm trying to get you to understand, and the New Zealand people to understand, we have a bigger problem than just managing these things tactically. We actually have to start to ask the questions in a high inflation environment. How do you run this economy? How do you manage it well? How do you provide good economic leadership? All right, we've got to go. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.